Ricordati.
I would like to remind all of you that some of our brothers and sisters, Atmir, Alessandro, Alizé Plus, Andrea, Angela, Antonio, Alessandro, Andrea, I would like to remind them, in order to talk about job this evening, we could only start from here. We could only start from the most recent, greatest tragedy, which is an individual pain for many of us, for many families, for many people that still wonder why this happened. And this is the question that will stay with us during this evening, during this meeting on the Book of Job, together with Julián, Carrón, Salvatore, Natoli, Mario Melazzini, and many others. And we need to start again from here to go through this journey. We need to start from the book itself, from this text. In the land of Uz, there lived a man whose name was Job. This man was blameless and upright. He feared God and shunned evil. He had 7 sons and 3 daughters. And he owned 7,000 sheep, 3,000 camels, 500 yoke of oxen, and 500 donkeys, and had a large number of servants. He was the greatest man among all the people of East. Job is the symbol of a happy man, of the rich man. He represents a man who's afflicted by many tragedies, but he knows that he's not guilty. He knows that God is not responsible for his tragedies, but allows them to happen. So, starting from the first encounter with from the first tragedies, Job decides to accept them. The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. May the name of the Lord be praised. Shall we accept good from God and not trouble? But sometimes evil becomes too much to bear. At this point, we feel that this is unjust and unfair. Why do the wicked live on, growing old and increasing in power? They see their children established around them, their offspring before their eyes. Their homes are safe and free from fear. The rod of God is not on them. They sing to the music of timbrel and lyre. They make merry to the sound of the pipe. They spend their years in prosperity and go down to the grave in peace. Yet they say to God, "Leave us alone. We have no desire to know your ways. Who is the Almighty that we should serve him? What would we gain by praying to him?" These are the reasons why the many questions that characterize this book. The main question is why? And still, it is not always evident in this book.
We can take for granted the fact that we ask why, that we ask the reason why something happens. Asking ourselves the reason for something was something that challenged the life of men. At the beginning, human beings used to explain everything with a bad principle, with a bad idea. And it's astonishing that Israel people who were surrounded by big empires, by different empires and cultures, it's surprising that these people, they weren't satisfied with that kind of explanation. They wanted to find another reason. They weren't satisfied with the two principles, the good and bad principle. They wanted something more. They needed something more. And why did this happen? Because Israel people, they had a good experience of a good God that revealed himself to them. Since they had this experience, they had to take it into account because they had the experience of a good God that had saved their population and that allowed them to run free from Egypt. And even when they undergo through hardship, for example, the exile, they need to look back at their history. They need to look back at their origin. They need to look back and think of the creation. And they must say that at the beginning of everything, there is a good presence, a good God. If you think of the first passage from the Genesis, well, it's all about a good song about the creation, about what God did. So their God, he cannot be the origin of evil. And this is why human beings can ask God, why? Why is this happening? I always tell a short story which was very revealing for me. When I was a teacher in my high school, one of my students came to my class after he had known that a friend of his had had a car accident. And he asked me, but why did God want this to happen? This is not fair. And I told him, I answered him, that when we are put to the test, we show the way we feel facing that test. For example, if you go back home this afternoon and while you're walking along the street, someone slaps you in your face, someone you don't know, what would be your answer? And that student answered me, well, I would slap him back in the face. I said, okay, and what if when you go back home tonight, your mom slaps you in the face? What would you do? And the student, my student, he didn't know what to say. He didn't know what to answer. And in the end, he said, well, I would ask her, why? Why did you do this, mom? So this question was a different type of reaction after that slap. And why did that student decide to answer that way? Because he knows his mother, because he has lived with her for his entire life. So it was clear for me and for all of us that asking the reason why something bad happens, it is something natural that happens if you have a relationship with someone. This is why I was deeply impressed by what Lewis says. Lewis, the writer, says, somehow Christianity arises the problem of suffering. Because suffering would not be a problem suffering wouldn't be a problem if we hadn't a final trust in this world, a final trust in reality. Because thanks to Christianity, we are deeply convinced that reality is something good.
Mr. Natoli, the most important question in this book. Now, I would like to comment what has just been said because I need it for my speech. Both the experience of your student who asked his mom why but doesn't ask why to other people, and the quote from Lewis, which means that God doesn't solve the issue of evil, he makes it more complex. It is an issue that is traditional. God forces a just person, an upright person, to go through pain and to suffer. Why? Either this is someone who's lying, it's not actually God, or, and this is what happens with Job, it is all about another kind of experience of God. This is why the book of Job is so important. It breaks with tradition. It is new. And it can talk to people that do not know the biblical world. Just a quick comment. We have talked about the love of God, a betrayal of God who punishes a just person. So we could talk about a kind of allegiance that was broken. But not every man in our history have gone through this kind of pain. I would actually say that the majority of humanity saw pain and suffering as something natural. So the way you live pain depends on your experience, on the culture you were brought up in. The Greeks, ancient Greeks, would have never thought that pain is just, or would have never thought of pain linking it to justice or injustice. It is just a nature. Just think about how animals live. We live by eating other animals, and life goes on thanks to this kind of cruelty. We need to eat at the end of the day. We need to eat something. The Greek world was a tragic world. Pain was part of their existence, so it is not about justice or injustice. It is actually about the fact, it is actually about how can we still go on? Can we find the strength to go on? Man tries to go on, to carry on, thanks to the strength of his own humanity. And I'm saying this because this idea on pain, it is not typical for Judaism, but for the rest of the world it is. I would like to talk about two questions. First of all, the fact that pain is linked to guilt. At one point in the Deuteronomy, it is written, "Whoever will abide by God's law will be blessed by him." And in the Bible, this could mean only three things. It was about there was no immortality of the soul. So it was all about another three things. First of all, a material wealth. many children, and a long life. Not an eternal life. This was not part of Judaism. These three things were a God's blessing. They would actually say that if you abide by God's law, you'll be blessed by Him. If you don't abide by His law, you won't. So, in the Deuteronomy, it is written, the sky will close over you if you do not abide by God's law. So, someone could actually say, well, Job was abiding by God's law, then why is he punished? This is the most important problem. So, either God is not actually God, is a liar, or man can talk to God and ask, why? Why are you doing this to me? And God could answer, because I don't want to lose you. Job never curses God. He says, I want to know why he's doing all of this. Before I give up on him, I want to know why. Because without God and his law, without this God that saves us, Job thinks, I will be lost. This is the most important representation of Job's cry. So, this cry is an extreme cry of pain. It represents man's suffering, man asking God, why are you doing this to me? This is a great representation of this pain throughout man's history.
صبحي شاي في معبدنا ونويري عقلنا والسمع والبصر
io grido a te.
I cry out to you, God, but you do not answer. I stand up, but you merely look at me. You turn on me ruthlessly. With the might of your hand you attack me. You snatch me up and drive me before the wind. You toss me about in the storm. The biggest question is about collective pain. And today's man lived it through the Holocaust. A book written by Zwikolitz is called Jos Rakover Talks to God. It takes place in the Warsaw Ghetto in 1943, when the ghetto was set on fire. Jos Rakover was there. He knows he is going to die. He lost his children, his wife. He saw them dying. And there he writes pages that will make history as one of the most striking testimonies of an unshakable faith in God.
Dio d'Israele.
I believe in the God of Israel, even when He has done everything to make me cease to believe in Him. My relationship to Him is no longer that of a servant to his master, but of a student to his rabbi. I believe in His laws even when I cannot justify His deeds. I love Him. The sun is going down now, and thanks be to God, I shall never see it again. The glow of the inferno flickers through the window, and the little piece of sky I can see is flooded in flaming red, like a waterfall of blood. Another hour at most, and I will be with my family, and with the millions of the dead among my people, in that better world where there is no more doubt, and God's hand rules supreme. I die at peace, but not pacified, conquered and beaten, but not enslaved, bitter but not disappointed, a believer but not a supplicant, a lover of God but not His blind amen sayer. I have followed Him even when He pushed me away. I have obeyed His commandments even when He scourged me for it. I have loved Him, I have been in love with Him and remained so. Even when He made me lower than the dust, tormented me to death, abandoned me to shame and mockery. You may torture me to death, I will always believe in you. I will love you always and forever, even despite you. Here then are my last words to you, my angry God. None of these will avail you in the least. You have done everything to make me lose my faith in you, but I die exactly as I have lived, an unshakable believer in you.
It is an extreme challenge. Jos Rakover challenges God and says, not even this will shake my faith. But what happened in the concentration camps, the Holocaust, brought many people to the decision of giving up on God. Elie Wiesel talks about when he arrived to Auschwitz and he saw the lines of people. Some were going to the crematorium, others will go through unbearable pain and suffering, will have to work there. This passage reminds us of those moments and of those questions. Someone began to recite Kaddish, the prayer of the dead. I don't know whether during the history of the Jewish people men have ever before recited Kaddish for themselves. For the first time, I felt anger rising within me. Why should I sanctify his name? The Almighty, the eternal and terrible Master of the universe, chose to be silent. What was there to thank him for? Never shall I forget that night, the first night in camp, that turned my life into one long night, 7 times sealed. Never shall I forget that smoke, never shall I forget the small faces of the children whose bodies I saw transformed into smoke under a silent sky. Never shall I forget those flames that consumed my faith forever. Never shall I forget that nocturnal silence that deprived me for all eternity of the desire to live. Never shall I forget those moments that murdered my God and my soul and turned my dreams to ashes. I stopped praying and I understood Job. I was not denying God's existence, but I doubted his absolute justice. Prisoners at Auschwitz have to watch the hanging of 3 people who have to pay for a sabotage instead of the 3 actual responsibles, whose names are unknown. One of them is a child. Where is merciful God? Where is he? Someone behind me was asking. Then came the march past the victims. The 2 men were no longer alive. Their tongues were hanging out, swollen and bluish, but the 3rd rope was still moving. The child, too light, was still breathing. And so he remained for more than half an hour, lingering between life and death, writhing before our eyes. Behind me, I heard the same man asking, "For God's sake, where is God?" And from within me, I heard a voice answer, "Where is he?" Well, this is where, hanging there from this gallows. Julián Carrón and Salvatore Natoli. This is the question of all questions. If God exists, if he is just, why did he allow this to happen? Why did he remain silent? And Benedict XVI also asked this question when he visited Auschwitz.
Più urgente quanto più grande il dolore.
This is a very important and human question, especially when the suffering is that much. This question cannot be erased thanks to the experience that Israel people had in their lives. And at the same time, thanks to a lot of testimonies, we can become aware of the fact that a lot of people, even though through hardship and suffering and deep pain, a lot of people still think of their experience that they had in their lives, an experience of a good presence in their life. At the same time, on the other hand, other people just question the good experience that they had in their relationship with God in their life when having hardship or sorrow. Therefore, when we suffer and when we are full of sorrow, we have two options. The first one is being helped by this presence to face this sorrow. And we have a lot of facts that are a testimony of this for us in our Christian history. You can think of a lot of episodes in our history where, despite lots of sufferings, nobody questioned the existence of God. Think, for example, in the Middle Ages, the plague. Even though they had this suffering, the plague, nobody questioned the existence of God. No one. Thanks to their relationship with God. Of course, it was something mysterious. It was something nobody could explain. But at the same time, nobody questioned the existence of a presence, of a good presence in their lives. And on the other hand, there is a second way of facing sorrow and suffering. For example, if you think of recent facts, of recent episodes, for example, in 1755, when there was the Lisbon's earthquake, well, it was a significant episode for all human beings, because people started to believe that God wasn't a good presence anymore, because he allowed that earthquake to happen. And when we start being suspicious about God, when we start questioning his existence, his presence, well then, God is not a friend of ours anymore, but he becomes someone who is guilty. And if you think about modernity, the lack of this presence erases the question. If you ask a question to God, that's because you have a relationship with him. That's because through history, we had the birth of human beings who were able to ask why to God. Whereas we think that by questioning the existence of God, we would be happier, but that's not the true solution. A very significant example is, for example, a well-known person, a well-known author, Franz Kafka. In his work, The Process, the question is erased. We have no question there. So the lack of God, of this presence, doesn't solve the problem of man. We're not moving forward that way. Because the presence of God is simply reduced to something natural, but someone we cannot address our questions to. And this is clear in many cases, many authors, and many other people, contemporary people as well. For example, think of natural disasters or tragedies. And unfortunately, we have a good experience of tragedy every day. Well, when these things happen, our question, our human question, is reduced, because everything is reduced to a psychological issue. We don't ask our questions anymore to anyone. However, if we truly think of this, our question cannot be eliminated. Our question, our need for reason is stronger than ever. So the new question is, what makes it possible to face sorrow and pain with a sense in our life, with a meaning?
As we go on reading the book of Job, there are more and more issues that come up. And our goal here is to choose some of them because this is a very complex text. I would also take into account the readings we have done in today's meeting. You chose two texts regarding Auschwitz. And in both these texts, there's the question, why didn't God intervene? And so, how does the pact and the alliance between man and God work? If you're part of an alliance, of course you're gonna ask the other part, why didn't you do anything? But if you're not part of an alliance, you have other questions, not this one. And a Jew like Primo Levi doesn't ask this question. He doesn't ask anything to God because, yes, he is a Jew, but he doesn't relate to God as an eternal being. This question can only be asked only by those who already are familiar with God, by those who have faith. If you don't have faith, you cannot formulate this question because there's no you. Maybe he'll have other questions, but not this one. First point I wanted to make. Then, why do the people living in Auschwitz wonder why didn't God intervene? They do this because they feel God betrayed them. Second point. Could actually God intervene or not? I'll try and answer very briefly from a biblical point of view. At Auschwitz, God could not do anything, could not act. And here, we need to make a distinction regarding the nature of pain. This is extremely important. There is a pain that comes from nature, from illness. And only nature is guilty. But all over human history, there's also another kind of pain, which is the pain you're forced to endure by someone else. A man forces another man to endure pain. This is Auschwitz. It's not an illness. It is not cancer. And if you, at the end of the day, accept pain coming from nature, because we are mortal beings, we don't die because of pain. We have pain because we're going to die. It is not suffering that brings death, but our own mortality makes us suffer. So, at the end, we're all going to die. We cannot escape pain. But if you are forced by someone else to endure pain, this could actually be avoided, and so pain becomes evil. So why do I say this? Why couldn't God intervene? Because he should have taken away man's freedom. God may save you from cancer, yes, but he cannot take away your freedom. Nothing can be done about pain coming from man. This would go against man's freedom, a freedom that was given to man by God. So, in this case, we are responsible for the pain we inflict. So here is where Job becomes really interesting. Christ didn't die from an illness. He didn't want to die. He's forced to die. He could have avoided dying. But he doesn't regard other people as guilty. He forgives them. So I could actually go back to Job at this point, at a part of the book which is often forgotten. It is all about the pact I was talking about, the alliance. Satan says to God, "You gave Job everything he wanted and you don't punish him." Here a dilemma comes up, because this is a wrong question. Because according to the pact, if Job abided by the law, he shouldn't be punished. But at the same time, Satan believes that Job should be punished by God just because it is God's job to punish man. So the devil says to God, "You don't make Job suffer, and therefore he doesn't betray you. He abides by your law." But what is the reason behind Satan's question? The real reason? He says to God, "Job loves you because you give him something in return. He doesn't love you just like this." What's wrong about this? What's hidden behind this? He doesn't love you just like this. Well, Job at the end shows that instead God has to be loved just like this, just because he has to be loved. This is his experience of God. Carrón.
Per questo, come dice,
As Professor Natoli says, it is very common that the scandal of evil is the scandal of freedom. We would prefer to live in a society without freedom. I remember something that happened to me. I was in Milan with a taxi driver, and he started asking me some questions. Why does God allow these things to happen? Why does he allow suffering and pain? And at some point I asked him, would you prefer a situation like this? Would you prefer to be loved by your wife in a mechanical way so that she will never betray you? Would you prefer that? Or would you prefer to be loved by your wife because she wants to love you? Well, and he didn't doubt a second. He said, well, I would prefer to be loved by her because she wants to love me, because she uses her freedom. And then I asked him, well, don't you think it's the same for God? It's the same for the way God loves us and wants us to love him. He wants to create a relationship with us, a relationship in which we can be totally free. And this is sometimes a scandal for us.
Let's take a step back and let's go back to the question about those who are faithful but have to endure unbearable pain.
sono sempre considerato un uomo molto fortunato.
I've always thought I was a lucky man until I discovered I suffered from a very bad disease, sclerosis, and it was very hard for me at the beginning because I had to face different limits, the limit of medical science and also a limit that described my creator. My creator was full of limits. He had limited my life thanks to this disease. And when I discovered that, I thought I had been helpful in the medical field. I had cured a lot of people and made them happy through different treatments, but everything was useless for me. I couldn't be cured, so I was very, very angry. And at some point, I said, okay, I'm going to decide when I'm going to die. Nobody else is going to decide that for me. So I isolated myself. I didn't want to talk to anybody. I only talked to a few people, close friends of mine. For example, a Jesuit friend of mine. We had shared lots of things together, both from a personal and professional point of view. And that friend once told me, well, if you want to be alone in your life, if you want to stick to that decision, which was the decision to decide when to die, I had already contacted a clinic that would kill me because it was something unbearable for me, that disease. I was totally dependent. I couldn't do anything by myself. And it was a lifestyle, a concept of life that I couldn't accept because it was against my ideas and my conception of life, of course. So this friend of mine told me, well, just take your time, take a moment for yourself, and he gave me his Bible with a bookmark, and that bookmark was right there in the book of Job. I accepted that gift, that Bible, because he was a friend of mine, so I couldn't say no, and also because I respected him a lot. And I've always thought about my life according to some landmarks, indicators concerning my personal life, professional life. I was a very rational man. And this is the life I started living. There was a person with me, a caregiver with me. I was alone and I started thinking about myself, and above all, I started thinking about one of the most important landmarks in my life, which was the mountain. So almost for a month, I was already in a wheelchair. I thought about all the things that I would have never done anymore in the future, due to my disease, of course. And I thought about my strengths, my weaknesses. And at some point, I decided that at some point, I realized that I was asking why. I was asking the reason why to God, to whom I had always entrusted everything and everyone. And he wasn't answering to me. And I was asking him, why me? Why did you do this to me? I was living a good life. I was a good man, a good doctor. And now I won't be able to do lots of things in the future. meanwhile, I was reading the book of Job. After a month, my friend had given that to me, and I started reading it, but it's very hard to read the book of Job because you read it and it seems something that you cannot hold. You cannot really identify yourself with his words, with the words of Job. So it was a very difficult reading, but I was helped by a prayer by Mother Teresa of Calcutta, and that said, you need to look at the future. And I was only looking at my past, and I wasn't building anything. So I started being aware of my limit, and that limit became my strength. And all of these led me to one important passage of the book of Job, that passage where Job says to God, I understood that you are almighty, that you can do everything. When I read that sentence, I was very astonished because I understood that it was a matter of the way I looked at that mountain. Of course, I couldn't stand up, but I looked at that mountain, and that gaze filled my heart. And I also realized that being aware of my limit allowed me to understand and to give value to Job's experience, because I shared the suffering of Job. Everything that he described, it was the way I felt in my everyday life, even with my friends, with my friends that used to tell me what I couldn't do. Well, this is something, a shared experience for every one of us. Nobody wants to suffer at all, but unfortunately it is very likely that we have an experience of pain. Well, and this is what Job wants to tell us, especially in that passage that I talked to you about before. Of course, I am a believer, and I thought I believed in God, I believed in a merciful God, but after that year, after discovering my disease, well, after all the path, I can now say, yes, I knew you, but now I met you. I met this mystery, and I know that you, God, this presence, you are always with me, and you let me live my everyday life with an added value, even though my everyday life is extremely difficult. And everything can happen, everything is real, everything is tangible. Don't take anything for granted, because life is full of tests. And the book of Job in my everyday life has a fundamental importance. Some years ago, I discovered that my nephew suffered from a very rare disease, and the first question that I had was, why? Why him? But at the same time, a silent answer, and also the awareness that God is almighty, that he can do everything. And it's almost a paradox, but I am sure about this, that he can do everything, that everything can happen. I had other tests in my life, for example, a rare disease that was diagnosed to my son. That was tough, that was hard, but I thought God gives and God can take away. And all of these things, all the path, all the things that I've discovered, let me say now that the book of Job is reality, is our life. Unfortunately, suffering is present in our everyday life, but at the same time we must be aware that there is always a meaning, even in those cases when we don't know what that meaning is. There is always a meaning. Well, through the reading of the book of Job, I understood, I became aware of the reason of our existence, and this is fundamental. And this affects everything that I do in my everyday life. I found an inner strength, a strength that doesn't depend on me, but a strength that depends on being aware of the fact that the disease, the suffering, they are an added value and they belong to our everyday life. It's all about the way we look at things. It's the way we look at our life. It's the way we look at our everyday life. And if we have a good experience with God, as I had, we can find a positive aspect of our life. We must be brave in our everyday life. We must ask questions. We must ask God the reason why, but at the same time we must be able to listen to the answer. It is a silent answer, but it tells us that the mystery is present in our reality. He is Almighty and He can help us through everything.
كان لي بالأمس قلب فقضى وأراح الناس منه واستراح ذاك عهد من حياتي قد مضى بين تشبيب وشكوى ونواح إنما الحب كنجم في الفضاء نوره يمحى بأنوار الصباح وسرور الحب وهم لا يدوم وعهود الحب
Myrna Cassis, Syrian artist. The music you've just heard is about pain and love. But unfortunately, there are other kinds of pain in our life. Lately, you'll know what happened in Italy and in other countries. Today I'm talking about the pain and the suffering my people, the Syrian people, is going through. Unfortunately, many people had to endure pain and suffering. Many people had to leave everything and go away without even a bag with them. They were forced to find another place, a safer place in another country where there are no rockets or no bombs. Other people decided to stay in their home, to send their children to school, well knowing that their children may not come back from school because bombs were falling even on schools. I was fortunate enough. I only didn't meet with my parents for 4 years. This was nothing compared to what other people went through. I had no visa to go and visit them, but I am very fortunate. I know they are alive and well. I went on and I did what I wanted to do. Of course, I felt guilty because I wanted to help my people. So, last year, I joined an association that helps children living on the border with Syria. It is a project called Plaster School. I would like all of you to appreciate and cherish what you have, as I did, as my friend did. I would like you all to help who needs your help, because you can do it. Thank you. All the human beings through the story, and Job especially, have been asking questions of God. A more trivial poet would have made God enter in some sense, or rather in order to answer the questions. By a touch truly to be called inspired. When God enters, it is to ask a number of questions on his own account. In this drama of skepticism, God himself takes up the role of skeptic. He seems to say that if it comes to asking questions, he can ask some questions which will fling down and flatten out all conceivable human questioners. Does the rain have a father? Who fathers the drop of dew? From whose womb comes the ice? Who gives birth to the frost from the heavens? So, Julián Carrón. God asks Job these questions.
Perché?
Job's cry, why, give me a reason why, makes God answer. He accepts that challenge issued by Job. And as Chesterton says, now God is going to ask some questions. And it is very clear, if we read those passages, that God needs someone to talk to, because that person in front of him, in front of God, must be aware of who God is. So a dialogue is needed. We've just seen it in the testimony by Dr. Melazzini. We have just seen that his pain, his suffering, was the chance for him to discover God even more. The history of Israel people is the same. They found a God, a presence, that when asked all types of questions, answers them by showing them the being, the creation. God says, all the questions that you ask, everything that you're saying, cannot eliminate the being, the creation. In order to answer Job's question, God shows Job everything that he created. As the verse that we've just read, who fathers the drops of dew, it seems nothing, but it's something vital, actually. Is it more important the being, the creation, or the nothing? And this is what this is what God wants Job to be aware of. Is this enough? Is this answer enough in order to face pain and suffering? In order to give a reason to that pain? If we think of all types of sufferings and pains and tragedies, is it enough? God's answer? This is why it's interesting and upsetting at the same time reading a testimony by Zul. He says, in a very hard situation, in a very hard condition, he says, when I look at hungry people, when I look at people who are dying, every day I can feel the cry of man, of human beings. I can feel the cry of humanity. But at the same time, I also looked at the jasmine and at that part of the sky that I could look at from my window. It's the creation, it's reality, it's something that proves the existence of God. That jasmine exists thanks to God. Our sky exists thanks to God. And this is the way we can be aware of what our reality really is. Sometimes we reduce the reality we live in because we are hurt, because we suffer so much and we're not able to have a wide and full perspective of everything. But when we use wisely our reason, then we can say, as the writer says, my life has become an ongoing dialogue with you, God, an ongoing dialogue with you that never stops. And he keeps writing, when I sit on a field, when I look at the sky, and when I cry because I'm grateful for the reality that I live in. And think about that. This writer wrote these lines in Auschwitz, in that same place. What does it mean? That our pain, our suffering is a challenge to our freedom, is a challenge to our life. We can be able to face every single aspect of reality without hiding anything, without censoring anything, because we have someone we can ask questions to. And this is the beginning of something new. This is the beginning of an answer that has to be fully shown.
The beginning of the answer shows that they are coming closer to one another. Yes, they're coming closer, but at the same time, the experience becomes bigger. As I have already said, the experience of God changes. What Mr. Melazzini said shows this. God doesn't answer to Job, or at least he doesn't answer according to the principle of redistribution, which is a mathematical principle. If I think about my own career, my own studies, when I wrote a book about pain, I thought about this, and there I found out about Job. I already knew him, knew the book, but at that point I started studying it and knowing it. And I understood that from ancient times, philosophy has always tried to explain things, to find the causes. Well, there's a very particular event in human history where we cannot find a reason. This is when I came across Job. So I stopped thinking in an abstract way, trying to find reasons behind things. I didn't try to find a reason why pain exists, but I started studying how people endure pain. I concentrated on the experience. And Job tells about this. And what I mean when I say that the experience of God changes. God is no longer the God that is a part of an alliance, of a pact. He is no longer the God of the Sinai who decides the law, but he becomes the God of the creation. He shows his strength, his power, and Job is astonished. Now, this power doesn't wipe Job out, but frees him, because you can trust this power. And this is shown by the text we have just read. Jos Rakover says, I will still believe in you. But we need to focus on the final lines of the text, because it is almost a quote from the book of Job. He says, yes, you tried and make me stop believing in you, but I will have an unshakable faith in you. Praised be forever the God of the death, the God of vengeance, of truth and judgment, who will soon unveil his face to the world again and shake its foundations with his almighty voice. This is God's power. Yes. The author says, I believe in you because you're powerful, but what's the difference between man's power and the divine power? The omnipotence of God. Man's omnipotence is different because it is all about who's stronger than the other. I'm stronger, I'm more powerful than you. But then there is always someone who's more powerful. This is how we destroy one another, especially the weakest. God's omnipotence is different. He's not powerful because he's omnipotent, but because you cannot catch him. Because he's not humane. He's different. And this is the leap faith requires. Not asking for help to a human force, a strength that protects you, but to a mysterious force, a mysterious strength. This is what faith is all about. So the experience of God becomes the experience of the mystery. So now man can actually do this leap and say, I don't want to lose you. I came across a very interesting text who synthesizes Job's most important question by saying, my God, even if you do not exist, why don't you help me? The answer to this question may be this leap, but then there are other ways to experience pain and suffering. I'm not talking about an eternal you, but something else, a different experience of pain, which is about the other. And by other, I mean men. So the relationship with other men, with other people. So someone else helping you in your pain, sharing it with you. This is the non-religious alternative, but maybe these two are complementary. This is exactly the journey we're trying to go on. And maybe there will not be a definitive answer.
See, in these silences, when things let themselves go and seem almost to reveal their final secret, we sometimes expect to discover a flow in nature, the world's dead point, the link that doesn't hold, the thread that, disentangled, might at last lead us to the center of the truth. The eye ramages, the mind pokes about, unifies, disjoins in the fragrance that grows as the day closes, languishing. These are the silences where we see in each departing human shade some disturbed divinity. But the illusion dies. Time returns us to noisy cities, where the sky is only patches of blue high up between the cornices. Rain wearies the ground. Over the buildings, winter's tedium thickens. Light grows niggardly, the soul bitter. And one day, through a gate ajar, among the trees in a courtyard, we see the yellows of the lemon trees and the heart-size thaws, and songs pelt into the breast, and trumpets of gold pour forth epiphanies of light.
This is a poem by Montale, who tries not to see, not to understand, but then he comes to the conclusion that there's something else, something beyond all of this. Light can come from the smallest things. And it seems that poets usually understand the link between everything in our reality. Among them, the poet Mario Luzzi, who considers the Book of Job as mind-blowing. Mind-blowing because there's a lot going on and not everything is crystal clear. Luzzi says, I see it as a tool that introduces the Jewish culture to Christianity. Despite the suffering and the tests, Job doesn't cease to believe in Yahweh and to worship him. He endures all of this because he wants a God he can communicate with, a God who's no longer omnipotent, but who is closer to him. Even though not everything is clear in the text, the general meaning of the book is Job's desire to talk to God and Job's request for God not to boast about his greatness. My ears had heard of you, but now my eyes have seen you. So, a relationship. We were starting to talk about it. Yes, I said the experience of God changes because there's a huge question in front of us. Man is fascinated by what is beyond. Is part of what is beyond. And other people have said that. For example, Coelet. We can never have the last word on our world. We are within, inside it. It would be presumptuous to try and have the last word. We can only say something which is temporary. But sometimes we are not ready to take this leap. Giussani said, quoting the Gospel, "No one will come to me if I don't call him." But I would like to quote Wiesel once again and say, where can we see God? Maybe in the child who is dying. What if God is human piety and not something else? Now, if this is true, if God is only human piety, then this is a secular point of view of the Bible. Now, what can we mean by saying, for example, resurrection? The disciples in Emmaus met with Christ, who resurrected, and do not acknowledge him, do not recognize him. They say he came with us because it was night. Night comes for every man. When he entered their home, they recognized him when he took the bread in his hands. When he shared it with them, they saw God in that bread. In all of this, there's God. Julián.
Non risponde
God doesn't give Job an explanation of everything. He gives him his presence, his powerful presence. And of course, this is just the beginning, God's answer. Because the hint of that presence would develop even more. And it has developed even more through history. It became flesh. And this is why we can say that Claudel understood the way God answered man's suffering. Only God, when asked the question of human beings, why do I have to suffer? Only God was able to answer. And how did he do that? Well, the suffering, the question was so big, so huge, that he was the only one, God was the only one to answer that question. And how did he do that? He couldn't give an explanation. He couldn't explain things from a theoretical point of view. He gave his presence to us. He became flesh. He came here on our earth. He didn't come here. Jesus Christ didn't come here on earth in order to destroy and to eliminate human suffering. He came here to stay with us, to be with us in our lives, to be together with us, so that we can discover more and more who He really is. This is why God didn't decide to reveal something like that just by sending His Son to us. He didn't spare His Son suffering. And thanks to the presence of Jesus Christ, we can deeply understand what this relationship is about, the relationship between God and man. This relationship is so powerful that evil won't win. Of course, we become suspicious when we experience evil. If reality is different from the way we want it to be, then we become suspicious. We feel distant from God and from religion. And the first comment that we make, the first remark is, but what have I done? Why did God act this way? Why did He allow this suffering? This is our first reaction. But if we look at our history, at Christian history, we have a man, Jesus Christ, who wasn't spared anything. He suffered as everyone else. But despite his suffering, despite the evil, the relationship with his Father was stronger, and he didn't separate from his Father. When he talks to his Father in the olive tree field, he talks to his Father for the last time. And that's the most important dialogue that Jesus Christ has. That's the most important dialogue If we think of all the other people surrounding Jesus, especially during his passion, they are not as important as that dialogue that he has with his Father, because his suffering can only be explained through that dialogue. God is still a Father to Jesus. He is still a Father. But what does Jesus ask him? Well, if I can avoid this suffering, please do that. But not my, but your will. And after this dialogue, Jesus Christ is aware that he is in the hands of God. And he feels even more that relationship with his Father, with God, even in the very last days, in the very last moments of his life. We all know that Jesus Christ won against evil. And thanks to his resurrection, thanks to his presence in our earth, we are now able to feel and experience our suffering in a different way. Because thanks to his relationship with God, thanks to the love for his Father, for his God, he lived forever. He lives forever now. If you think of St. Paul, for example, and of his letters, who is going to take us away from the love of God? Maybe the dangers, the fears, the suffering. Who is going to take us away from God's love? We are winners, because there is someone, there is a presence that loves us. I am deeply aware that neither death nor life, neither angels nor demons, neither suffering nor joys, no creature will ever be able to take us away from God's love that became flesh in the person of Jesus Christ. And this is something that we can experience today, thanks to a lot of testimonies. For example, Miss Shun, or Father Kolbe, or Mr. Mario. These people, they show us the mystery of God, and they show us the way we can deal with evil and suffering. And they also show us the fact that our circumstances can strengthen our relationship with God, because we become more and more familiar with our God.
Sometimes man, who is tormented by evil, has to face unsustainable tests, which clash with man's humanity and almost kill it. Therefore, human beings consider these tests unfair and do not understand them. When we are blinded by our suffering, we may not see, or we may be horrified by the paradise of knowledge this test brings. If this is true, don't let your inevitability make you look at us with lost and cryptic eyes, but talk to us. Test, please talk to us again and forever, as you have already done before, through the mouth of your saints and through the moan of the crucified incarnation. This is the end of our journey. We would like to thank many people, first of all. Thank you to all of you, Massimo, Paolo, Mirna, all of them. Yesterday, they all took part to a very important show. I would like to thank the wonderful exhibition on job. You need to see it. You cannot miss out. Thank to all of the people who organized it. Thank you, Nacho. Thank Mr. Natoli. Thank Julián, Carrón, and thank you, Mari, for being here. Thank you to all of you.